Hi, I'm Timothy Caulfield, and I'm a Canada Research Chair in Health Law and Policy at the University of Alberta, and I'm ready to start digging deep.
I'm Mark Sutcliffe. Welcome to Digging Deep, presented by Zen Books. I'm really excited about our guest this episode, Timothy Caulfield. Digging Deep is a series of one-on-one conversations with thoughtful, interesting, accomplished people, covering many different fields: business, media, music, science, entertainment, and more. Digging Deep is all about hearing people's life stories and the powerful lessons, the valuable observations, and the unique perspectives that they can share with all of us. Here's how we do it. We start off with some rapid-fire questions. Our goal is to reveal little pieces of information about the background of the guest, and then we start digging deep into those stories and life lessons. Our guest is Timothy Caulfield. I've been fascinated by Timothy Caulfield's work for a very long time. He is such an incredibly strong voice for science and research, and he's an outspoken critic of all those celebrity endorsements of unproven health products. Tim is the Canada Research Chair in Health and Law Policy at the University of Alberta, and he has written several books, including The Science of Celebrity, or Is Gwyneth Paltrow Wrong About Everything?, The Cure for Everything, Untangling Twisted Messages About Health, Fitness, and Happiness, and Relax Dammit, A User's Guide to the Age of Anxiety. He is also the host of the television show A User's Guide to Cheating Death. I watched many episodes of that show and loved it. It was presented in 60 countries. There is some great stuff in this conversation with Timothy Caulfield. He talks about how we make decisions, how we place anecdotes over real evidence, how we see connections sometimes where they don't exist, why we're attracted to unproven health solutions, including the simple fact that alternative medicine is sometimes packaged so much better than conventional medicine. He talks about the erosion in critical thinking in our society, how he deliberately seeks out opposing views, how you should always initially resist the evidence, and we also talk about the one life hack that actually does work. Also, Tim shares the story of how his family came together after the loss of his mother, about his brief time as a punk rock star. His band actually opened for the Ramones, how he chose to invoke Gwyneth Paltrow in the title of his book, and the three women who have had a huge influence on his life. One last thing before we get started. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and post a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, and share this podcast with your network. And if you're looking for more information about the show, if you want to read my daily blog, where I post every single day of the year, very short posts about interesting things I've learned or observed, or if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, The Weekly Dig, which has 5 very quick items that I've learned about each week, you can do all of that at our website, letsdigdeep.com. That's letsdigdeep.com. You can also find a link to my TEDx talk there. Now, let's start digging deep with Timothy Caulfield. Timothy, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to Digging Deep. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on. It sounds like it's going to be a fun engagement here.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope so. And listen, I have to say, I have admired your work for a long time, and I've interviewed you a few times before, and we were at an event together once. And I really respect not just what you do, but how you do it. I really enjoyed the TV show that you did. And especially, I admire the way you have taken on the task of debunking a lot of the myths that are out there, challenging the celebrity pseudoscience and all of that. So thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you for that support. I really appreciate it. And holy cow, is there ever a lot of misinformation now? It's unbelievable.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that coming up. So it seems to me that we should be in a better place right now than we are when it comes to misinformation. But we'll talk about that coming up. Let's start with a few quick questions. So to begin with, what would you say is your fondest childhood memory?
Okay, so I would say, so we're talking little kid, right? Little kid memory, those sort of vague, kind of foggy memories. You know what it is? I grew up in Mystic, Connecticut, and it has this beautiful Seaport Museum. It's a whaling museum, and walking around the Charles W. Morgan, it's an old whaling ship, is my fondest memory from my childhood. And it really kind of, I think, helped shape my curiosity. You know, the smell of oil on the street, you know, when that's the smell of the Charles W. Morgan. So whenever I pass someone working on the street, it takes me home.
Wow. And smell is very closely associated with memory, right? So that
Right.
makes sense. Yeah. Who was your hero when you were 10 years old?
So 10, you're like grade 4, grade 5. Paul McCartney or Mick Jagger, kind of in competition, going back and forth. And by the way, that competition continues. But that segued really quickly to Joe Strummer from The Clash in just a couple of years. And the other guys were in the rearview mirror.
Okay. What did you think you were going to be when you grew up?
So we were talking little kid again, right? So
Yep.
aeronautical engineer. What happened to that?
Wow.
Yeah,
That's a very specific profession for a child to be thinking about.
And we're talking child, Mark. Like when someone would ask me, I'd be like, you know, kindergarten, grade 1, I wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. I love drawing, you know, rockets, and I love drawing jets. And I actually have a little rocket tattoo, like a kid drew. And so I figured that was the closest thing to doing that for a living.
Right on. What is your life story in 6 words?
6 words. Luck, love, because I love what I'm doing. So curiosity, grind, because I have very few talents. But I do grind at it. And the other one, I guess, would be, is this 1 word or 2? Imposter syndrome, I think is, you know. So I think that's it.
Okay.
Is that 6? I think it's close.
Yeah, absolutely. And since you mentioned talents, what is your secret talent? What's something that people don't know about you that you're good at?
My secret talent. I guess I'm a bad juggler.
Is that a talent if you're bad?
I don't know if you're bad at it, is a talent. I don't think it's a talent.
What would you say is your greatest mistake in life, and what did you learn from it?
So my greatest mistake is, and I wonder if you can relate to this. Early in my career, I'd get angry at people and I'd respond, right? So I'd send an angry email. I would point refutation to something that someone said about me, or total waste of time. Total waste of time. I think it was Lincoln who said, do not waste your time with personal conflicts. And I've tried to live by that, and it's really made a difference. Like, do not respond. It does not matter. Like, it does not matter.
Yeah, and don't read the comments under the article, right?
So true. True.
For what do you feel most grateful?
Mark, I bet, do you have a family? You're going to agree with this. It's your family. It's a cliche, but it's so true. But Mark, I'm also super, super grateful for my career. I know how fortunate I am to have that. So I would say those two. My health. But
what has been the best year of your life so far, and why?
You're going to hate this answer. You're really going to hate it. Whatever was the last year, I really feel like I'm not one of those people think, the glory days or this year or that. I really feel fortunate that every year has been interesting and proving and unique and different. So yeah, whatever was the last year is my favorite year. I don't know if I'm going to say that about this year.
Right.
but I've spent more time with my kids this year than I ever would imagine I would. So I feel grateful for that.
And what about the toughest year of your life so far?
So I had some really tough years growing up. I really did. My mom died early. We had, me and my brothers, we had no money at all, right? So it was a real struggle. But this shows what it's like to be a parent, because I had really tough, sad, hard years growing up. And I feel very grateful for all the other opportunities I've had. But the toughest year, my eldest son was very, very sick one year, really, really sick, months in the hospital, easily the worst year of my life, easily. And it really shows how those stupid kids, how much you care for. Right? Those stupid
Yeah.
kids, right? They're emotionally draining. So yeah, for sure that year.
Yeah. And
I actually
he's
asked my
okay.
son's permission if I could say that.
Okay.
And
And he's okay now?
yeah, he's absolutely fine
Okay.
now. But really, as a parent, you know what that's like.
Yeah. What one person has had the greatest impact on your life?
Can I pick three real quick?
Sure.
Three women. My mom, Professor Bartha Maria Canopers, who's my mentor. She's University of McGill, but University of Montreal at the time, and Justice Ellen Picard, just an inspiration to me. So those three women have really led the way for me.
Wow. What is the most important lesson that you've learned that you would share with others?
I guess it would be, again, it would tie back to that, move forward, think about, working the problem. It sounds like I'm a cop on a CSI show, work the problem. But I really think that's true. I think people get caught up in the details and the angst. Work the problem, move forward, and have fun.
Does that go back to grind when you were talking earlier a little bit?
I think it does, and I think it's my brother who's also had a really interesting career, and all of my brothers actually. I think they'd say the same thing. We really we have few talents, but we really enjoy grinding it out and moving forward with things. Just let's work the problem. Let's move forward.
So you mentioned that you grew up thinking you were going to be an aeronautical engineer. You ended up in a very different place. What do you think is the biggest factor or turning point in your life that led you to where you are today?
I would say getting a job. So I went to law school. I did science first, and I knew I wanted to do something in science policy. I knew that's where I wanted to go. So I wasn't like this just drifting around. But I got a job at the Health Law Institute at the University of Alberta, and Gerald Robertson would, he'd be on that short list of people that have inspired me. I worked with him, but as Justice Ellen Picard started that institute, changed my life. I don't know if this has ever happened to you. It was like, this is what I want to do. From that moment on was, health law, science policy, health policy. As soon as I started working for that institute, my life changed. Like I knew this is exactly what I wanted to do. And so I'm incredibly grateful. And that was kind of luck. It was one of those, this looks like an interesting job. Maybe I'll try that out.
Wow. What would people be most surprised to learn about you?
I love donuts. I love procedurals. Those really cheesy TV procedurals. That's my happy place. The really bad ones too. I'm not talking about HBO, high art here. I'm not talking about.
So network TV.
We're talking network TV. We know where it's going. We know the crime's going to be solved, and it's solved in 45 minutes. Yeah, I think that would be surprising to people.
Yeah, and the donuts too. That's a little bit off-brand, I think.
It's a little off-brand. And also, again, I'm not talking highbrow donuts. I'm talking Timmy's.
Okay.
I'm talking the real thing.
What is the most fun you can remember having?
That's a kind of a complicated question, because then there's like joy, and there's like this sort of deep, long dinners at a restaurant with my family, or those are the kind of really rewarding. But sheer joy, I think so I used to play in a band. I was fortunate to have a little bit of success on stage with my buddies, playing at a big gig, crowd going crazy. You know what? It's true. That's a pretty awesome moment. You're playing your own song. Pretty amazing.
That would be amazing. No question. What's the scariest thing you've ever done?
I did practice law briefly for a while. And I don't mind public speaking. I actually really enjoy public speaking. Absolutely terrified of cross-examining. I don't know if you've ever talked to other lawyers. I think, holy cow, it's terrifying. I was kind of shaking and that's off-brand, because I really don't mind. I'm like borderline.
Yeah, you can ask tough questions. There's nothing, nothing holding you back there. But
I don't know what it was. You've got a judge in front of you. You've got someone counting on you. You don't know what the witness is going to say. You think you prepared. It's not like it is on TV. Speaking of procedurals, it is not like it's on TV. Really terrifying. And also skydiving is pretty scary.
Okay.
Very similar.
Yeah, those two things together. Yeah. What would be your boldest prediction for the future?
Everything's going to be okay.
That is pretty bold right now as we talk. What would be the message of your commencement address if you could speak to a group of graduating students?
Just like a sentence.
Yeah.
I think it would be okay. Be nice, work hard, and have fun.
That's pretty good.
Be nice. Forgot, just be nice. If you had to pick one, it'd be nice.
Wouldn't the world be a better place if everybody just did that, for starters, right? Wow. What book are you most likely to recommend to others? Not one of your own.
Yeah. Can I just pick one that like sort of changed my, like,
yeah.
Do you know Barbara Tuchman's Guns of August?
No.
Oh, okay. It was the first, like I was thinking it was grade 10 when I first read it. Recommended to me by one of the great, Mr. Richardson, my grade 10 social teacher, another person who had a huge impact on my life, about the start of World War I. And it really shows you how, how great history can be, how great writing, nonfiction writing can be. So I'm going to say that because it had that impact on my life.
All right, Tim, thank you for answering all those questions. In just a moment, we'll start digging deep with Timothy Caulfield. We're just going to take a quick break so I can tell you a little bit more about the presenting sponsor of Digging Deep, ZenBooks. ZenBooks is Canada's go-to cloud accounting firm. They are not your typical accounting firm. I know the founders, Colin and Eric. I've worked with them for several years. And here's why I think you should consider working with them too. First of all, they bring a fresh, unique, modern approach to what is a very old-fashioned industry. These guys were working remotely and in the cloud long before it became cool. ZenBooks also uses technology to your advantage. I think this is really important. They give you the tools and analysis you need to monitor your business in real time. That's so valuable right now when everything changes so quickly. Yes, they're a virtual accounting firm, but that doesn't mean they're offshore, and it doesn't mean they're inattentive. ZenBooks combines the efficiency and effectiveness of a cloud accounting service with all the benefits that you'd want from a trusted advisor, high-level advice, and strategic support. Now, here's what I think is going to happen if you work with ZenBooks. You'll probably start out taking advantage of their cutting-edge cloud accounting solutions, but in the long run, I think you'll stay with them because of their strategic guidance and problem solving. Among their core values, they specifically list being candid and proactive. Isn't that exactly what you want from a trusted advisor? Look, even if you're already working with an accountant or a bookkeeper, or you have some accounting staff on your team, I think you should still talk to ZenBooks and learn more about their tools and their expertise. Check out ZenBooks at zenbooks.ca. That's zenbooks.ca. We're digging deep with Timothy Caulfield. You mentioned being on stage and having the crowd cheering as you and your friends were playing music. Is it true you opened for the Ramones?
Yeah, I did. I did open for the Ramones. I think.
Wow.
It was that was loud. That took volume. It was so loud. It's like your ears couldn't process it. And I was in a band, so I was used to loudness. But we played with the Ramones. I think it was 1983. And that was an amazing experience. But we were big enough that we got to do good gigs, and there really is something special. I think that era has totally passed. We don't have rock bands like that anymore. We don't have those kinds of experiences anymore. But when you were, I was in a rock band, and you're with your buddies. It's like a team. It's like a family. You're in this together, right? So that really adds to it. And we were like, we were basically Clash ripoff bands. It was called The Citizens, Power to the People. and so we thought we had this purpose too, right? We were naive and thought our songs meant something. And so you add all that together and you're experiencing it with people. It really is magical. And I'm still very close to many, to that community.
So let's go back to your childhood again. And you mentioned that your mom died early. How old were you, and what impact did that have on you and your family?
So I was just in university, starting university. My youngest brother was still in high school. The other brother was still in high school. And we did, at that point, we didn't have very much money at all. My parents were separated. I wasn't close to my father at all. So she was it. We don't have any family around here. It was sort of like, when she passed away, it's like, how are we going to pay the rent kind of thing.
Wow.
And, but she was just a remarkable individual. But it was, the four brothers are incredibly close. I think that's one of the things that has happened. I think we became very self-sufficient, particularly my brother. He's in high school and he's like worrying about rent and things like that. Right. So I think it really did, shape who we are. And one of my brothers, he took care of, really took a lot of the responsibility to take care of my mother when she was dying, and he became a nurse as a result of it. And my mother adopted him when he was quite old. And so he ended up being the first person in his family even to go to university. So after he became part of our family. So it really had an impact on all of us.
Yeah. But those bonds, obviously, I mean, I'm sure it's been a great comfort to you to have your brothers after having lost your mom like that.
For sure. My brother actually lives in Edmonton. He's a university professor also at the University of Alberta. We collaborate together. It's pretty magical, and I feel very fortunate.
Yeah. All right, so let's go back to the whaling ship. And how do you kind of trace back to that in terms of how that sparked your curiosity about things?
I had this admission too, because everyone else in my family is ashamed of me for this. I haven't read Moby Dick. So
you had this formative moment as a child, and you on a whaling ship, and you haven't read Moby Dick.
In Cape Cod, I grew up in Cape Cod.
Yeah.
My older brother, who is much better read than I am, bugs me about it all the time. I think that the whaling. Have you ever been on one of those go to those museums that it's a village, and my aunt was an interpreter at the Mystic Seaport. And I just think it's, stoked my curiosity about the past, it's this really crafty kind of community where people are building things. There's blacksmiths, and it's incredibly powerful memory for me. And I really do think that, stoked my interest in history and how things happen, why things happen in nature, all of those things. And it sticks with me. I'm still interested in that history and in that time period.
Is it true you were once on the same panel as Mark Zuckerberg and Tim Cook?
I'm going to say yes and no.
Okay.
So the yes, I'll tell you why, because one of them came in video. Does that count?
Sure.
Okay. So it was in Geneva. That was actually not that long ago. That was in Geneva, a European Commission thing, I believe. I've been very lucky to have a lot of cool experiences like that. But part of it is just the content, right? This misinformation has become such a big issue now. I think, I've seen this evolution over my career where concern about misinformation was kind of a niche topic. People understood it was an issue. Now it's center stage, right? It's absolutely center stage. So there's this wonderful community of scholars that are doing work on that topic. So that's, you get those kind of opportunities. Tim Cook was interesting because he was talking about that, what kind of strategies could be used around privacy, what could they really do about that, and also around battling misinformation. And this was before the pandemic, and holy cow, it's like center stage now.
Yeah. So you're literally in a panel discussion, and who was on the panel with you, and who was coming in by video? So
Tim Cook speaks. I can't remember before or after me. I can't remember. Isn't that terrible? You think this would be Berna? And then we have a panel discussion of academics, right?
Okay.
And then I believe was the video conference. So
with Mark Zuckerberg.
Unfortunately, I didn't get to interact one-on-one and ask Tim or if I could call him that, or Mark. It's like for any questions directly, because I'd have a few.
For sure. But there you go. You've shared the same space in programming space with the Ramones, with Tim Cook and Mark Zuckerberg, basically.
Yeah, and give me the Ramones.
Exactly. Yeah. But how many people can say that? So just in terms of how you formed your career, that combination of science and law is something I find really interesting. You did a Bachelor of Science, then you became a lawyer. So tell me a little bit about how that came about and what that brings to the work that you do now.
Yeah, I think it is interesting because I've always been a science geek, and I think that's part of it. It goes back to the whaling story. I've always been a science geek, and so and believe it or not, I'm entitled into the rock and roll too. That whole Clash era of music, there really was this sort of social justice element to it. So I kind of think those things came together. I know that sounds like it's a stretch, but I don't mean it to be. I also think that it was still somewhat unique when I was an academic to combine, science and law. It's less so now. You're starting to see more and more people combine degrees. You're starting to get a lot more individuals doing interdisciplinary work. But when I started in the 90s, it was still relatively unique. And I was always super interested in, people often ask, how do you get misinformation? I was always super interested. What are the facts? Like, why do we have that policy? What does the evidence actually say? Does that policy really work? Does food labeling really work? Does this public health policy really work? And so often, the answer is it doesn't. The evidence doesn't really back that up. So I was always fascinated with that, and for whatever reason, I don't know why, quite passionately felt about the disconnect between our beliefs, our policies, and what the evidence actually says. And I think that's really fired a lot of my work.
That's really interesting, because I find that if there's something that we could be a lot better at right now, there's probably many things, obviously, but there's sometimes a disconnect between we see a problem in society, and we all think we have the solution for it. And from a public policy point of view, there will be debate and discussion in an election campaign or in politics. And there will be certain presumptions about, okay, if we just do this, then that's going to solve that problem. For example, if we throw more people in jail, then we'll reduce crime, to oversimplify one enormous issue in our society. And quite often people don't end up bringing the evidence into that discussion, right?
You're 100% correct. And that's a great example from now, right? I mean, you look at what the evidence actually says about what you just described. It's pretty mixed at best, right? We can talk about masks, the evidence around masks. And that's a really good example, because it speaks to how science works, the perception of science, how science is represented to the public. There often is a disconnect, or at least the science isn't being communicated very, very well. And people will have these really passionate views about what the right answer is, when often the evidence doesn't back it up, or the evidence is on the other side.
Yeah, and I find that interesting. There's a sense that we all sort of have our opinions about things, and that's what should carry the day in a public policy debate, as opposed to what the evidence supports as the ideal solution, right?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And evidence evolves. Someone once asked me a good question. Name 3 things you've changed your mind on. This would be a good question for your top 10 questions. I can't remember what you called it, but name 3 things you've changed your mind. And it's a really good idea, because it forces you to have I reevaluated my position on something important that's evidence-based? And often we don't. Often we become wedded in these positions that become part of our personal brand, part of our personal identity, and it becomes really hard to change our minds. So
what have you changed your mind about?
I was worried you're going to say that, so don't go down this road, Tim. Okay, so I'll talk. A couple things that relate to my work is breakfast. I used to say, the evidence around breakfast is everyone should have a healthy breakfast. Evidence is actually a lot more foggy on whether you should eat breakfast or not. How I've conceptualized and think about obesity, I've changed my mind on that. And one of the big ones is, one of my books, The Cure for Everything, I really pushed exercise, and how I talked about exercise. You got to do this kind of exercise. You got to do that kind of exercise. I think the evidence still supports the idea that there are exercises that are efficient, or if you're trying to make physiological change, there really are better exercises than others. But just move. That's all that matters, and I worry that kind of messaging distracts from the reality. Just move. If you like throwing a frisbee, if you like dancing, if you like walk, just move. That's what's really important. So yeah, I always try to revisit the evidence on any topic. The other thing I do, I don't know if you do this, Mark, is I listen to, obviously I have my own ideological leanings. I also try to listen to news from the other side. And I used to go to Fox News, but I can't stand that. So I picked other ones that are more right leaning, just to see make sure that I'm getting all the perspectives. Do you do that too?
I try to do that, but you might be the only person in North America who's actively trying to do that right now, right? It's not a common practice right now, I don't think.
I think it's important to do that. And I also try to do it with science topics. I look for a paper that explicitly counters whatever the proposal is I'm putting forward. I think it's important to do that. If anything, you know what the arguments are on the other side.
Yeah, it's illuminating no matter what. Even if you decide to hold the same opinion going forward, you might as well know what the competition's up to, right? You mentioned movement, and one of the things I've learned, and which I've changed my mind about, is that I used to think, okay, if I go for a 45-minute run in the morning, then I've gotten in my exercise, and then my job would result in me just sitting down for the rest of the day, and that is almost, from what I can tell and what I've read, almost as unhealthy as me not doing anything all day. Right? That you actually have to get up and move around a lot during the course of the day and go for a walk. And, you can't negate 23 hours of inactivity with 1 hour of activity.
You're right. And I actually talk about this in my next book. You're right about that. And that's why I think one of the reasons it's so important to emphasize just that idea of movement, right? It doesn't take away from the incredible benefits of, exercise, of actually concentrating on exercise. Those are still incredibly important, lifting and getting aerobic exercise, really important, interval training, but just moving. And we're going to get from a public health perspective, we're going to get the biggest bang out of getting sedentary people to move, right? Everything else is almost gravy when you're on a population level, right? And so I really think that has to be the message. And sometimes I think we get caught up, especially in this fitness era, with these really specialized exercises that are going to maximize X, Y, and Z and give you sexy abs. That should not be our focus.
Yeah, we make it too complicated sometimes too, right? As opposed to just go for a walk. You mentioned your outlook about obesity had changed. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, and this one is a little bit more subtle, and I'm not the only one who's changed in this regard. But there was such an emphasis on calorie intake, and there was an emphasis, even if you were trying to be careful about it, to put, I don't want to say blame, but focus on the individual to change their behavior, to do something different. And even though I was aware of the complexity of obesity, you can't help to sort of gravitate towards that kind of perspective, right? This idea that, just eat less, eat these kinds of foods, but I think that is a futile view. Obesity is so complex. We really need to focus on people being healthy, no matter what their shape or size is. And we have to make sure we avoid language that might subtly lead to weight bias, which can have the paradoxical impact of making obesity worse, right? So I think that early days, when I really started working, because I used to do a lot of work around obesity, I was aware of those issues, but I was still kind of, this is how we got to eat. This is how we've got to exercise. When the reality is let's be healthy no matter what our shape, our size is.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I have to say my outlook about it has changed as well, because I probably was guilty of projecting character and values onto people who were overweight, as opposed to thinking of it as as a societal problem and a function of the environment, right? And I don't, I think if you really take a step back and look at the evidence, people have not suddenly developed less willpower in our time, right? It's there, you look at the reason obesity rates have gone up is not because all of a sudden people are weaker and they just can't stop themselves from eating. You can track it perfectly to a period in time when the production of food and the availability of food and the structure of society and our lives changed, right?
It's so complex, and I think whenever I even post a study that talks about how difficult it is to lose weight, you'll inevitably get some troll who'll say, well, just eat less, or, try, stop putting food in your mouth. It's just not that simple. And for the reasons you've outlined, we know that's the case. We know it's fantastically complex. And by the way, some in the research community are guilty of this too. It's when you have a hammer cliche, right? Everything looks like a nail. So the genetics people will say it's all genetics. And, the nutrition people say, oh, it's all this macro food, it's sugar, it's carbohydrates, when we know it is fantastically complex. It's everything from the microbiome to the built environment to the marketing environment. It's just so complex. So you're right. It's not one thing. So you can't, cast blame on individuals. The other thing to remember is what the evidence says about how difficult it is to lose weight. The weight loss data is grim, right? It is just grim. And that's not because these people don't have willpower, why individuals, it's just biology, the environment, everything conspiring against us.
Yeah, and as you said, there is still, I think it's in this time when we are fighting discrimination everywhere we can, there are still a bunch of tropes, like if you're making a movie and you want to demonstrate that somebody is lazy, you cast an overweight person in that role, right? There's still that going on in our time.
Yeah, not even that many years ago, it was really quite blatant in pop culture how they portrayed overweight individuals, and people with obesity were mocked, right? And I do think it's starting to shift. I don't know if you've noticed that. I think we're really starting to see a constructive shift. And then we also went through, this I think almost overcompensated with body positivity, and I think we're coming to a really healthy recognition. By the way, I'm for body positivity. I didn't mean it in a negative way, but we did get this, really this strong pushback to body positivity, and I think that's starting to dissipate.
So have you ever been examining the pseudoscience or unproven health solutions, or doing the kind of stuff you do on your TV show, and the outcome was different from what you expected going in? Has that happened?
On a broad scale, kind of no. On an individual experience level, yes. So let me explain what I mean by that. Look, a lot of this stuff, people will say, oh, have you ever been surprised by a particular therapy? Look, we know what the evidence is on this. For a lot of these things, if it worked well, we would know, right? We would know if there was a real strong effect size, whether you're talking about acupuncture or Reiki or supplements, we would know. It's not like these things haven't been studied. It's not like we haven't tried to. But I can say almost without exception, every time I've gone to an alternative practitioner, it was a positive experience, right? Almost without exception. So I've been to a naturopath, acupuncture, reflexologist. I've got cupping done. I mean, you name it almost. I've been in cryo chambers. I've tried everything. And with very few exceptions, it was positive. They listen to you. They're touching you. They're creating an experience that's tailored for you. They're taking your concerns seriously. And by the way, sometimes I've tried this not only with cameras with me. I've gone on my own and kind of in disguise kind of thing. And it's always a positive experience. So I get it. I get why people are attracted to these therapies. That doesn't mean it works, but it works. You can understand why people believe on an anecdotal level that it works for them.
So is that a placebo effect of sorts, or is it just good hospitality and customer service? Like, for example, if you go on a cruise ship, it's a great experience and a positive experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's extending your life.
I think it's all the above.
Okay.
I think you are getting a little bit of a placebo effect. And really what's often the placebo effect is overplayed. It's often what's called regression to the mean. So what happens is, you were going to get better anyway. Your back was going to start to feel better anyway. And so you have that regression to, the mean. And then you just attribute that to the last person you saw, which happened to be, someone, the homeopath. So, homeopathy works. You have a lot of that going on, but a lot of it is this listening. So I think we need to learn from that. What's missing from conventional healthcare. And of course, I'm being very kind of generous to the alternative community right now, which is rare for me, but they're also exploiting this, right? They whether consciously or unconsciously, this is their marketing tool now, right? That conventional medicine doesn't listen to you. Conventional medicine is just about pharmaceuticals. Conventional medicine just tries to deal with symptoms. Alternative medicine deals with root causes. And that's a marketing ploy that has unfortunately worked.
That is a fantastic point, because the customer service in the healthcare system is horrible, it could be argued, right? So even if they're delivering fantastic treatment, the packaging is all wrong. Whereas on the other side, you've got treatments that do nothing at all, or may even be risky, and the packaging is fantastic, right?
Exactly right. I don't know. Have you tried some of them, Mark? Have you ever gone?
No, but I've seen you doing it. I felt like that was enough for me.
Some of them are like reflexology is awesome. It's basically a massage of your foot, right?
Yeah.
And they have beautiful music and incense sometimes and candles, and it feels like something is happening, and it feels like something substantial is going on, and that has an impact. And you're right. I wrote a piece actually that hasn't been published yet that describes my horrible experiences with conventional medicine. Like I have had, almost without exception, my experience and my immediate family experiences with conventional medicine have been terrible, right? Terrible. And then on the other hand, all my experiences with alternative medicine have been great. That doesn't make this stuff work, right? That doesn't make this stuff work, and that doesn't make science wrong.
Great point. And I think about, when you think about all these different treatments that just intuitively make no sense to me, like what, Reiki and all of that kind of stuff. But that regression to the mean, I think, is a really important point, because it's sort of like the cold remedy that somebody suggests, right? So you have a cold, you struggle through it for a couple days, and then somebody says, have chicken noodle soup or do this, whatever. And then on the third or fourth day, your cold goes away. And all that was happening there is your body was fighting off the cold, and you happen to insert, some chicken noodle soup in the process. And now you're attributing the recovery to that. Right. And what I find fascinating about that is that we are so willing as human beings to subordinate research that assesses the experiences and the results from thousands of other people to our own personal experience, right? Why is that?
It's so true. And there's actually been research that has shown that. They've done studies that have found that, a powerful anecdote, a powerful testimonial will overwhelm our scientific thinking. It's hard to study that kind of phenomenon well, but there's evidence to suggest that, and it doesn't surprise me, at all. So you have that phenomenon going on. And then secondly, you have our tendency as humans to seek connections where there aren't any, right? That we attribute causation where it's really only correlation, right? And so we're so willing to do that, and then layer on top of that the experience thing that I talked about. But then also there was an interesting study that came out, I think in 2016, that found that people that use alternative medicine often go there because they're looking for efficacy. They go to alternative medicine because they're fed up with the conventional system. But once they're there, they start to buy into the philosophy and the ideology. And once you've done that, then it's very hard to change your mind, right? So you have all those things working together to create a belief system that's very hard to change.
Yeah, there's a confirmation bias kicks in, and then a sort of desire to reinforce the original decision that you made, and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So why is it, do you think, this is kind of the big question I've always wanted to ask you. You would think that in this time, when we have more science at our disposal, when we have the ability to get more information than ever to people, to make research accessible, to make it available, you would think that at this time we would be more on top of our game than ever before when it comes to incorporating science and research into our lives and separating fact from fiction. And yet it feels like the reverse is happening. We're actually sliding in this area right now, not just in areas like alternative medicine and pseudoscience, but in politics, in reporting of the news and all of that. What's going on here?
I mean, I think about this constantly, and I wish I had a simple answer for you. In fact, the pandemic's a little bit of a microcosm of what's going on, because you would think with a pandemic that we would be attracted to good science, and we would try to follow what the scientific studies have said, but we seem to now be going in the opposite direction. I think number one, I think social media has had a huge impact here, because it has created a chaotic information environment that makes it very difficult for people to tease out what's real and what's not real. We have a really frenetic information environment. It's not one that invites reflection. It's one that invites immediate thought and immediate opinion and immediate sharing, right? So that also, I think, adds to it. I do think, and there's some evidence to back this up, there has been an erosion in critical thinking. And so I think that's important for the education system to think about that, right? How can we improve critical thinking skills? And we know there's been interesting studies that show that you can do that. You can teach it. And if you do teach it, people are better at teasing out what's real and what's not real. And in addition to that, I could go on and on, but the other one I think is really important for today is that so much of the science now is politicized, and they've become ideological symbols, right? So you'll get people believing a certain thing about GMOs and about organic food and about fluoride and about vaccines, and they all kind of line up to particular ideological positions. And one of my favorite examples of that is, I'm sure you probably know someone like this. They'll say, Mark, I cannot believe that Stan doesn't believe in climate change. How can he not believe in climate change? The weight of evidence says that. But that same exact person will not believe the evidence on GMOs, right? Because one of those positions lines up with his ideological view and the other one doesn't. So, Stan doesn't believe in climate change, but Stan believes GMOs are safe. And then, Billy Bob believes that, the opposite, because they line up with their ideological beliefs. And I think that is playing a larger and larger role in how science is being presented to people. If you are this kind of individual, this is the constellation of scientific beliefs that you need to adopt. And by the way, here's all these tools that will allow confirmation bias to take to play its role, and you'll never have to change your mind.
So do you feel like in your work that you have been learning as much about human nature as you have been about science and research?
For sure, and ever more. And fortunately, I get to collaborate with people who are actually, work in this field. I get to work with a lot of great social scientists. In fact, on our COVID grant, I work with Gordon Pennycook at the University of Regina. Does really cool work where he actually does work with individuals to get a sense of their decision making. For sure, I think that is becoming a bigger and bigger role in our work. But I think also just in the battle against misinformation.
I wanted to ask you about the three women that you mentioned, your mom and the two other women that had a huge impact on your life. I think that's really noteworthy that you would be citing three women and three significant women and powerful women, obviously, especially, you and I are about the same age, and there were not in our childhood and in our, teenage and university years, there were not as many women in leadership roles as there are today, and there are still not enough today, frankly. So I find that interesting. Tell me more about that and about the impact that's had on you, that you had these three women that shaped your life.
For sure. I'd love to talk about all three of them. And And I've been also really lucky, Mark, that a lot of the collaborators I've had, like Laurie West, who's a transplant researcher here, Janet Rossant, amazing stem cell researcher in Toronto. I've for some reason, I've always had these incredibly impressive women researchers to inspire me. But Bartha Knoppers is she had a huge impact on my career, probably more than any other individual. The first job I got was as a research associate at right when I finished my graduate work. Bartha hired me as a research associate. She was a law professor, and in my mind, I thought I'm going to be a traditional law professor. I'll write articles for the Law Review and I'll teach. She just blew that up, right? She said, "No, you can do interdisciplinary research. You can, do social science research. You can work on these big, huge research team with leading scientists." She really said, you do the academic career that you want to do. There are no boundaries. And that was all Bartha. And she's still doing that, by the way. She's an amazing, I don't know if you've met her, if you had the opportunity to interview her. She's a force of nature. Ellen Picard, very much the same. I don't know if you have someone in your life like this, where you can actually say, what would Ellen do in this situation?
Right. Yeah. Everybody needs somebody like that, right?
If I'm in a tough, there's like some kind of professional thing going on or a conflict, or what would Ellen do? And she really is, an inspiration. So she started the Health Law Institute. She was a professor. She was a justice on the Court of Appeal in Alberta. Really an inspirational individual that always has her compass pointed in the right direction. Very deliberative, always calm, always thoughtful. And I think that I was just lucky to have those kind of people in my life.
So the other big question that I wanted to ask you is, what happens to a person when they take on Gwyneth Paltrow? and maybe we should go back to you including her name in the title of your book, because I think that would have been a big decision. So I'm curious to know the backstory behind saying Gwyneth Paltrow is wrong about everything in the title of your book.
Penguin has been amazing to me, by the way, incredibly supportive. And my editor, Diane, I actually believe it was, really conversation with her about this. And I actually think there wasn't originally a question mark, right? So it was going to be Gwyneth Paltrow is wrong about everything. And as you know, the book actually isn't about Gwyneth. It's about popular culture and the science about popular culture in our lives and celebrity in our lives. And I think the lawyers wanted us to put a question mark. So it was we're just asking. We're not saying she is. We're just asking. And it's very interesting because that title became, I think, very emblematic of my career. And I didn't really mean it to be. And I also, when we picked the title, we had no idea what a huge example of pop culture noise that Gwyneth would become. Goop was still relatively new. It was kind of this esoteric idea. It's kind of fun. And she just kept going and accelerating, right? And becoming more of the queen of pseudoscience. So there was pause. I will say this, we sent the book out for a lawyer to look at it, right? To see if there's anything they were concerned about. And they only asked us to change one thing. And it was about Gwyneth. And in the book, I said that Gwyneth Paltrow smoked. And did you know she smoked?
No.
No, she actually bragged about smoking. She has one cigarette. It's the right amount of naughty, I think is the actual quote, which is a horrible message. I guess there a worse message for someone who is focused on wellness. And the lawyer said you have to change it to, it's reported that Gwyneth Paltrow smokes. So I couldn't say it like it was a fact. But yeah, that's sort of the thinking that went around it. We just thought that Gwyneth was a really good example of the problems with celebrity in the health space.
Yeah. But I think it is emblematic because you're tweaking the nose of the celebrities, right? As you're, and this is reflected in all you do. I think that you're taking them on head on.
Yeah, one of the things that is important when you're battling misinformation, and there's actually evidence to back this up, is to be nice. Be nice, be authentic, be humble. And I think that's very true when you're talking to other people and when you're talking to people who are just trying to get the right answer, whether it's about vaccines or GMOs. But when it's a celebrity and the celebrity is exploiting misinformation or exploiting a situation to sell product or build their brand, I think it's totally appropriate to be snarky. And that's sort of been my my approach. And I have some colleagues like Jen Gunter who sort of take the same approach. And that's why I also think that it's an opportunity to use a cultural moment to talk about science. So some people will say, oh, you're wasting your time talking about Gwyneth. Well, that's not really the point. The point is to use Gwyneth Paltrow and all those other kinds of celebrity moments as an opportunity to talk about science, because the audience should always be the general public.
And so was there any reaction, any blowback? Like, what does happen when you take on Gwyneth Paltrow?
Yeah, I think there was. I think there'd be less so now. Of course, I got a lot of blowback from fans. I got some blowback from magazines that were more oriented to pop culture. Oh, this is just for fun. You're taking this too seriously. This is a little bit of luxury. I can't remember how it was described. So you got that kind of blowback, and then a little bit, obviously, from Goop, who have defended their position variously. Goop, has gone after implicitly me, but explicitly Jen Gunter. So there has been blowback, but much, much less so, I think, over the last couple of years, because I think there's growing recognition of the real harm that's done by this kind of rhetoric.
So you regularly debunk the pseudoscience and the messages that we hear from people like Gwyneth Paltrow, and point out how unfounded a lot of that stuff is. But what are the life hacks that you can validate? What are the best practices you can share, and what are some of the ones that you apply in your own life?
So you're going to be able to guess and name all of them, but I think it's really important to do it, to name what really works. There is so much noise, right? The wellness industry is a multi-trillion-dollar industry that is mostly based on no science at all, right? It's a science-free zone in general, which is pretty astounding. You think that we spend trillions of dollars on stuff that does not have science behind it. So what does work is, you don't smoke. If you smoke, nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. You don't smoke, you exercise, you eat real food. That real food one sounds like a cheat, but it's not. We've known what a healthy diet looks like for a long time. It's whole grains, it's healthy proteins, it's lots of fruits and vegetables. There really is no magic food. You sleep. Now this one's tough, and I've actually thought about collapsing this. It was, maintain a healthy weight. And the reason that I've left it on my list, and I've thought about collapsing it into just eating healthy, is because that having obesity and being overweight still is associated with health risks, right? And I also think that thinking about maintaining a healthy weight is part of a healthy lifestyle. That's not trying to stigmatize people. We all struggle, but so that's one reason I've kept it on. The obvious preventative strategies, wear a seatbelt, wash your hands, get vaccinated. That is about it, Mark. That's about it. Everything else, that'll take you 98% of the way there, right? Everything else is largely noise.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I keep defaulting to is I try to remind myself that that the basics actually are most of it. And so, for example, if a solution comes along that sounds out of bounds with all of that stuff, then it probably will not work, right? And that it just, on a certain level, that makes a lot of sense, that, to use Gwyneth Paltrow, that, you shouldn't be inserting things into parts of your body because that's not really very natural. And why would that create a health benefit? But we're so hung up on this. And I wonder if it's sort of like the John F. Kennedy conspiracy theories, that we can't accept a simple explanation or solution for something that we consider to be massive, right? And prolonging our life, we expect there ought to be some trick or some extra thing, as opposed to just get a lot of sleep and exercise, eat well, and look after yourself, right?
You're right. And look, if it worked, we've talked about this a little bit already. If it worked well, we would know, right? Because the effect size would be obvious, right? It's not going to, if there was something that genuinely worked well, it's going to extend your life, it's going to revolutionize your health, we would know, I promise you, right? And I think you can really say that. But people, they are always searching for this magic elixir that's going to help them. And some people, I think we need to listen. Why are people attracted to stuff? Why are they searching? And part of it is marketing. We can't forget that. We know that this marketing works, and that's why celebrity culture has such a big role to play here. But yeah, try to ignore all that noise. And what's really interesting, there's some evidence that suggests that if you can do that, if you can ignore this noise, you are going to feel happier and you are going to feel less anxious. And of course, that also is something that's important to your well-being.
So is the only life hack you need the fact that there are no life hacks, basically?
I think that is the case. I think, find something that you love so you can exercise, because not everyone likes exercise. I'm very fortunate that I really enjoy exercise. Not everyone's like that. So find something that you enjoy that is going to get you moving. And those are the kind of real life hacks that you really need to think about. How can I adjust my life? And the other thing is, you got to enjoy it. Because you know what, we're all going to die. So you got to enjoy day to day.
Yeah.
Because being able to sustain a behavior change is one of the greatest challenges. So you have to be able to do it in a way that's enjoyable and is sustainable.
Right. So create the conditions that will make you follow those rules, right? Those simple rules that are hard to stick to. Create the winning conditions for yourself, basically.
That's right. And there is interesting research going on about how to do that, how we can nudge ourselves to do it. But everyone's different and everyone has different preferences.
All right. Well, Tim, this has been fantastic. It's so great to hear you talk about all of this stuff and to share some stories from your life as well. I really appreciate this. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me on, Mike.
Wow, I really learned a lot from that discussion. I think we should all be more skeptical about evidence and about all of the claims that are being made by people trying to sell medical products. We should also try to avoid all those traps that Timothy talked about, like putting anecdotes over research. And there's something really interesting, isn't there, about the fact that alternative medicine is just sometimes better at marketing and making the client feel good, better at packaging than conventional medicine like a trip to the doctor or the hospital. And I try to remind myself all the time about the simple, basic lessons of how to stay healthy. Sometimes it really isn't complicated. So once again, thank you to Timothy Caulfield. And hey, if you enjoyed this episode of Digging Deep, please review it and share it with others. That will help us produce more great content. And if you want to keep digging deep into topics and lessons like this, please subscribe to our weekly newsletter and read my blog at letsdigdeep.com. That's letsdigdeep.com. Thank you for listening.